Everyone is having fun here. Looks like we got some attendees that are here and into the other breakout rooms. You won't be on video. We did this as a webinar, making sure that we can, be able to present and talk and have a great time with each other, but also that we're not all talking over each other. Because we've been on a Zoom call lately, which I'm sure a lot of you have. There's a lot of just chaos and random words. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand. That's something you can do down at the bottom of the screen, and I can actually unmute you and make sure that you have the ability to talk. But thank you all for being here today. This is a very special day. Not only is it my birthday today, which if you asked me if I was going to be spending my birthday quarantined, talking to constituents and voters and making sure that we have a plan going forward and all just making sure we are all informed, I probably would have said no. I would have not expect the coronavirus to be pushing us all in here. I'd be imagining I was knocking on doors, having a big event and seeing you all in person. But unfortunately, we have to be a little bit isolated, making sure that we can flatten that curve. So thank you all for coming in here tonight and finding a pretty cool way for democracy. I think this is going to be something that is used more and more for in the future, because not only is this an incredibly accessible town hall, but it's also a very green town hall. We all got to stay in their houses. We didn't have any impact of everyone driving everywhere, renting out a space, and actually taking up a location. So at least we have some upsides with this town hall, and the fact that we can record this and that you can jump in, jump out. You can look at my website. I hope you do. Go to votejohnkelly.com. You can see my entire platform on there, and really check out some of those details as I'm talking to you. But I wanted to go over a little bit about who I am, as well as why I'm running for state senate here in Colorado. But I think first we need to talk about coronavirus. Obviously, this has been on the top of everyone's mind, everyone's, just the front and center of everyone's attention for at least the past couple of weeks. And we've seen a lot of people saying this is unprecedented, that we would never have seen this coming. But the truth is we should have, right? The experts have told us time and time and time again that a pandemic is really likely, given our current economic structure, how much trade and movement of people we have going on, how many people we have, and seeing how rapidly it can spread, especially in a communicable way, especially in a disease like this where not everyone shows symptoms, that a lot of people are asymptomatic. And so this moment should have not been out of the realm of possibility. We've seen outbreaks and really some great efforts we've seen in the past to stop things like swine flu, to stop Ebola. And we've seen a lot of really progressive ways to stop that early on. But unfortunately, coronavirus, it hit at a moment that not only were we not prepared for it in hospitals and around the world to see this pandemic in the way we have, but we were not only ready for Medicare for all in this country. We saw the lack of health insurance in this situation be one of the driving factors for the explosion of disease, for the problems that we face. We've seen it with workers' rights, with the inability to take sick leave. That's such a fundamental human right that we did not have before this crisis. And as soon as we happened, it was said, oh no, what happens to the economy when workers can't go to work? It collapses, right? We're on the brink of an economic depression. And it's because we didn't approach these really fundamental progressive policies that we've been talking about for decades that have not even they've been seen as radical, but now they've seen we have to implement them in an emergency because of how dire they're needed, especially how fragile this economic system is, that if one thing is threatened, the entire floor gets swept out from underneath us. Talking also about affordable housing. Are you kidding me? This is one of the situations where we have over, 500,000 people in the United States going without a home tonight, trying to fight off coronavirus. We don't have a plan for them. We didn't have the opportunity to take this conversation seriously before this. And now we really are regretting it, especially seeing some of these larger crises that we don't have a mechanism to really to stop, and recognizing that these issues have been happening for quite some time, but this has been the cultivation of this moment. Instead of building hospitals and affordable housing, we've been instead fighting for profit and building private prisons. And instead of, providing tax breaks to workers and making sure that they can get a quality education, and making sure that healthcare is a human right, that housing is a human right. We gave those tax breaks to corporations and oil and gas. In the state of Colorado, oil and gas only paid 0.6% in taxes last year. That's absurd. That should anger you. That should show why we've had such a shortage of the things we need in this moment, not only of healthcare workers, childcare workers, of hospital beds, of nurses, of healthcare workers, but also the researchers that we need to actually push for this and that would come out of an education system. This is a systematic problem, is what I'm trying to say, that we have a situation here that not only we have a spread of a disease, of a virus, we also have a threat of an economic depression. And it's because all of these issues are intersectional and related. And we desperately need in this moment, not incrementalism, holding our brakes, just allowing the floor to slip out from underneath us. We need bold leadership. And unfortunately, speaking about coronavirus, we're not getting that from the state legislature at the moment. And as many of you saw, in Colorado, they ended their legislative session early in claims of trying to lower the spread of coronavirus. But if anyone's seen that chamber, those comfy chairs are definitely more than 6 feet apart. And especially in this situation, we needed relief for gig workers, for musicians, for artists, for servers, for childcare workers, for teachers, for contract 1099 employees that kept getting pushed more and more into that role. We needed relief from them, and we didn't get that. We needed to have a serious plan about the prisons here in Colorado. They're just waiting. It's not a matter of if they'll get coronavirus, it's a matter of when and how quickly that spreads in those areas. And the private detention facilities that have continued to go on despite the protests, despite the impassioned reason, despite them not having a leg to stand on. Those private detention facilities still open to this day, and those human beings in there are so at risk of death, and we didn't get that leadership on that. We needed the legislator in this moment to find solutions about our homeless population, figuring out how to house those without a home and making sure that they too can survive coronavirus. We needed the legislator to find solutions to the lack of hospital beds and to provide safe quarantine to those folks. We have hotels shutting down in Colorado by the dozens in the state, but we did nothing for the individuals who have no place to go, the people who don't have a hospital bed at this moment, that are going to get pushed out and not have the protection and isolation that they needed. We needed our state legislator to protect democracy. We're having an election in what is this? 9 days or 8 days on March 28th on the Boulder County Assembly. That could have been an opportunity to make sure that every candidate had the opportunity to get onto the ballot, that we lowered petition signature requirements as they did in New York, but instead we made it harder. And so individuals and candidates like myself have to go through a risky path and going through a digital assembly in a way we've never done it before in the state, hoping that our delegates will be able to come out and vote for us and do so without getting marginalized. But we haven't gone through this process before. No one has. And we didn't have the leadership we needed. We needed to have hazard pay for our grocery store workers and our nurses. We didn't get that. We needed to have protection for the elderly, for the immunocompromised, for the undocumented, for the unhoused folks, those with a chronic illness, and those with little access to expensive healthcare. And we didn't get that. We need bold leaders who need to recognize that there is more than 6 feet between those comfy chairs in the state Senate, that they could have stayed there and fought for the legislation, fought for the solutions that we need in this pivotal moment. And instead they took a break, put up their hands and said, not our problem. We didn't do this, not our problem. We need leaders that are willing to stay there, to fight for it, to be that lone voice in the state Senate and say, hold on, let's stay here. Let's actually fight for the people that elected us to be here in a crisis, because they're scared, because they need us, because we need to act as a state and make sure that we have the resources going forward to provide our community with the resources they need to isolate, to stay in their homes, to make sure that we don't spread this disease too quickly. And unfortunately, we didn't have that. And so I don't know how to make this not sound like a crisis, because it is. It is a crisis. We need to treat it as such. We need to have leadership that will approach this with resolve, with pushing for the solutions that we've been pushing for decades, that we know will attack income inequality, that will lower the gap between CEO and worker, that'll make sure that we have the mechanisms in our society to protect us from something like this. And so that's a little bit about what I think about this current moment and why I'm here talking to you now, asking for your help to win this seat, to get a seat at the table, to elect the youngest state senator in Colorado history, the first queer person to sit in this seat, the first union member to sit into this seat, and making sure that we have the leadership we need on these issues and stand up for those marginalized voices in a way we've never seen before. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is John Kelly. I live in Longmont, Colorado, and I'm running for state senate here in District 17. I work at CU Boulder at the National Center for Women Information Technology. In that role, I'm a senior regional affiliate manager, which is just a fancy title for a volunteer coordinator. And I get to have a lot of really amazing conversations, moments, and really fight for systemic change in that role. I work with volunteers in over 25 different regions across the United States, everywhere from California to Florida, to New York, to Puerto Rico, to right here in Colorado, making sure that we can work with academics and professors and departments and colleges and universities, from industry professionals at Google, at startups and small businesses, to K-12 educators, to all work to close the gender gap in tech and provide systemic change to an industry in desperate need of change. That includes working on changing the culture, making sure we can address unconscious bias. That means also addressing the lack of resources in this area. Currently, there's going to be 3.5 million jobs in 2020 that will go completely unfilled because there's just not enough workers to be in those jobs, specifically in tech. And that is a huge problem, and one that I've been working on for the past, it's almost 4 years now, 3.5, at the National Center for Women Information Technology, to work with volunteers to recognize high school and collegiate women in their academic careers, making sure that we get them connected to scholarships, internships, job opportunities, working with those individuals in academic institutions and corporations, and actually speaking with volunteers and making sure that they push for change within inside of their own organizations. And so that's been one of the most meaningful jobs for me, and being able to really connect and fight for that systemic change, not just telling women to lean in and all you need to do is apply, but also working to change that culture, because we recognize a lot of these workplaces are toxic, that they haven't been as accepting as we've seen in coronavirus to the workers who need specific compensation, policy, protection from sexual harassment, workplace safety, and they haven't been getting that, and making sure we can fight for that systemic change. Also at CU Boulder, I'm currently one of the co-chairs, one of 3 on the staff council there, and it's been a really rewarding role. I was elected to staff council a little over 5 years ago now, when I first started at the Department of Computer Science at CU Boulder. And I ran specifically to address the epidemic of sexual assault on campus, and making sure that we can pass meaningful legislation and address the rape culture that existed at CU Boulder. And so I got into the staff council and really started raising issues in a area that hadn't heard that voice in a while, that had mostly heard about, let's talk about the ice cream social, the field day, but not really, let's fight for workers' rights. And that voice changed the conversation. We started talking about compensation. We passed resolutions on fighting for a sanctuary campus, fighting for LGBTQ protections for our community at work, and making sure that they feel able to be out at work and without fear of discrimination. We also passed resolutions specifically calling for compensation, higher involvement for staff in the process. And one of my biggest achievements was when I was elected chair my first term. I was able to fight for paid parental leave, and we did everything to pass that. We did everything from researching a white paper outlining how much it would cost, seeing how much it would save them in money and downstream revenue costs, and making sure that we outlined exactly how to implement that policy, because we had a lot of experts on staff council. We were able to do that, as well as getting that anecdotal experience, hearing from staff members themselves and hearing about how this contributed to the gender pay gap on campus and how it disproportionately impacted women in the workplace. And so we outlined this white paper, and working together with the Board of Regents, making sure we reached out and organizing workers at work and saying, this is something we need, this is something we should push for together as a community. We were able to get that for 10,000 staff members, not only at CU Boulder, but CU Denver, CU Anschutz, and CU Colorado Springs. And that was something that started organically. That was something, while I was making, under $15 an hour as an admin assistant in the computer science department, running in my workplace, making sure that we organized, that we spoke out about these issues, and pushing that in a meaningful way. And that's a lot of the reasons why I'm running today. we need to actually organize and push for this systemic change. And that isn't just on economic justice, but it's on environmental justice, racial and social justice, and all the intersectional issues that really impact our ability to move forward as a society. Because we need to fight in solidarity for each other. One thing I learned is that, maybe, I don't have any children, but I'm willing to fight for paid parental leave because I see how it impacts my coworkers. I see how it impacts those in my community. I see how it impacts our society in general and how it contributes to the gender pay gap. And making sure that we stand in solidarity with each other and building a huge coalition, and a coalition of workers specifically. The 80% of us living paycheck to paycheck, the 80% of us, hear that. That's why we're in a crisis right now. The 80% of us who live paycheck to paycheck. And that's numbers specifically from the Department of Treasury outlining folks who do not have more than 3 months of salary saved, really at risk of homelessness, and especially here in coronavirus. That's why we're having to end evictions, temporarily halt penalties on payments, but that's still going to impact credit scores. That's still going to impact, they're still going to owe that debt. And this is still a terrifying time because those people are at huge risk. And if we do not dramatically, quickly, immediately restructure our economy and make sure it works for all of us, we're at risk of a global depression. And I have to emphasize that. I know that's scary to say, but that's the reality of what we're looking at. When we see a third of the stock market knocked out in 3 weeks, we need to talk about emergency situations. And we are, but a lot of them have been for corporate bailouts. A lot of them have been temporary and not helping those who are unemployed or only helping those who, are in the upper middle class. This is a major problem. We have to attack income inequality in a huge way. And this is more about just specific policies. It is about policies, and I'll be going into those and sending some links. Like I said, this town hall is great. You get to click on links. But this moment is about pushing back against power. This moment is about power and reclaiming that power for us, because we're not only in a crisis with Corona, but our democracy is in peril. Our global environment is severely damaged and only getting worse. Wealth grew at 6 to 7 times faster than the economy did last year. Actually, it grew a little bit faster, 7 to 8 times. So it grew about 25% on average, while the economy grew about 3%. When we talk about, all you have to do is work harder. No, wealth by itself, sitting alone in a bank account, grew 6 to 7 to last year, on average, 25% faster than the average economy. They had a huge raise last year. And we are trying to combat all of that while fighting coronavirus. We're trying to transform our energy system while fighting coronavirus. We're trying to transform our economy while fighting coronavirus. We're trying to fight for equality and social justice and racial justice while we're fighting coronavirus. And it's essential that we do that together. And we do all that together. We make sure that this conversation doesn't get dropped, that we do not let any voice get left out of the conversation, because we do not need, at this moment in time, the drip, drip, drip of incrementalism. But we need the flood. We need the flood of systematic change. We need the whirlwind. We need the thunderstorm. We need the earthquake. We need to fight for a political revolution in this state and ensure that we get the progressive leadership we need. And so some of my policies, I'll go into them. I specifically outline on my website Robinhood taxes. And these are outline taxes. You can see exactly the rate that you'll pay. It's not a hidden one. I'll put this into the chat right now so all of y'all can check it out. Boom. There you go. Robinhood taxes. It is one of the most essential things that we do, that we actually reallocate resources in our economy. And for anyone who thinks that this is giving away free stuff, it's changing the allocation of our resources. And if you can't understand that's a function of government, then maybe you shouldn't be involved in this conversation, because we absolutely need to do that in the state. We pay a flat tax rate in the state of Colorado. That's insane. That is full stop insane. It's absolutely offensive that a CEO pays the same exact rate as a custodian in the state. We also give huge tax breaks on that to those wealthy individuals, to those corporations that also pay a flat tax rate, to the oil and gas industries that pay one of the lowest rates in the nation. And then with the tax breaks and loophole they get from us, they pay the lowest in the nation. In 2018, we collected 0.6% in taxes from them. So they got to keep 99.4% of their profits during a boom year. And right now, they're collapsing. The biggest oil company, this is breaking news today in the Denver Post, biggest oil company in Colorado, Anadarko, they have now a F-bomb bond rating because of how much their industry is tanked. And that has nothing to do with regulations. They have been still drilling more, pumping at the same rates more than they've ever been before. They're pumping more oil out of Colorado than they ever have before, but their economy got cut in half by Saudi Arabia, by better technology, by cheaper, greener, renewable technology. And those jobs that you hear, conservative Democrats talk about that they desperately need to protect have already been gone. We've seen the employment rate of those companies plummet. And this is something that they've done time and time and time again. They've done it in Ohio. They did it in North Dakota, where they have temporary jobs, even good paying jobs. They won't even take that from them, good paying jobs. But that they're temporary because this oil industry has always existed on a boom and bust cycle. So that's why we got to make sure that we hold their feet to the fire, that we actually have a marginal income tax rate, as you can see on my website, that we have a wealth tax, we have a carbon tax on pollution, that we raise the oil and gas tax, and we make sure that we tax wealth meaningfully in the state, and we raise revenue to have an unprecedented investment into some really great policies that you get to hear about now. Some of them include a Colorado Green New Deal. And let me talk about this for a second because, God, this sounds like an easy gig for a Democrat right now, right? You have a Colorado Green New Deal. It's the catchphrase at the time, but it's not a concrete policy. No, I have concrete policies. I want to create jobs from the state of Colorado, good paying union jobs that have that are permanent, that are in infrastructure, that are in research, that are in education, that are in the areas that we need to transform our energy system immediately, that we start the transition now, not 10 years from now, not 20 years from now, but start it today. I'm also calling for a ban on fracking and making sure that we can, and let me actually take a step back because maybe all of you haven't heard or haven't been as up to date in where we are in environmental policy in Colorado, because this is actually a really big contentious issue that hasn't got a lot of coverage because the Democrats in the state, in my opinion, have been passing Republican bills. They've been passing Republican bills that have really not, they sometimes say, well, there's maybe some problems, but I wanted to give it some progressive change, some incremental reform. And so that's an argument that they've been making. Don't listen to that argument. That argument is not based in reality. They have been passing Republican bills that actually push back the environmental movement further than it's ever been before. And they push back our ability to fight oil and gas and entrench them in areas where we can't have them entrenched. I'll give you an example. So SB 181, it was in the biggest environmental bill that came out of the Colorado legislature, and it completely focused on local control for regulations for oil and gas, and had local municipalities be able to regulate their own areas. Some progressives fought for that. I think that's really short-sighted, and let me tell you why. We might be able to ban fracking here in Boulder County. We might be able to turn the ship around here in Boulder County, but unfortunately, pollution does not stop at county lines. Weld County has 89% of all fracking in the state of Colorado. 89%. That's terrifying. That is way too much. That is so horrifying because when they heard local control, when they heard the Democrats say, oh, local municipalities can do it and we have more flexibility to be able to actually enact their own legislations, Weld County put on their Trump hats and said, drill, baby, drill. And they passed regulations to specifically allow oil and gas companies to take property without a hearing, without due process, and start drilling for oil. Private property, people's homes, people's ranches, farms making food. They can now, they say, this is a bigger priority here in Weld County is to drill for oil. They can petition to go for that, and the owner doesn't have a big say in what that can do. And that actually came from the Democrats' bill. So if you think that was incremental change, you're wrong. because that's where 89% of the fracking goes down. And we might be able to ban it in white affluent counties like Boulder County, but here's Weld County, and this is a bigger problem. So that's why we need a statewide ban on fracking. That's why we need to make sure we ban it wall to wall, top to bottom, because this is too safe, this is too dangerous to regulate, and we don't need it. The oil economy is crashing at the moment. We have already 60,000 oil wells in the state of Colorado. We have 60,000, and we had another 2,000 that happened last year under Jared Polis's watch. We have another 20,000 that are abandoned and uncapped and causing untold damage to our environment, and we want to still allow them to keep drilling? That's absurd. That's radical to me. This crisis, the climate crisis, we need to treat like coronavirus. We need to recognize that we have the science. We have to recognize that we know what's coming. We have to recognize we know the solutions even. We have the recipe to do this, but we have to start the transition now. So that's why I'm calling and saying, not one more oil well. Not one more oil well. We don't need another oil well in the state of Colorado. We need to start the transition now. We need to have leaders willing to stand up for that. And currently, we do not have them in the state Senate. Currently, there's no one like me in the state Senate. Currently, there's no one in the state Senate that is calling for a ban on fracking statewide. There's two candidates I know of, myself and Maria Orms. I don't know if she's watching. Hello, Maria, if you are. But we need that leadership. We need that leadership like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been able to provide and be able to push for a change in the conversation by calling out ingrained injustices in a way that people haven't done before, by ridiculing them, by making sure that we use blithering sarcasm to make them feel the stupidity of their plans and the inevitable failure of this late stage capitalism that we're in, that allows employers to exploit their workers and force them to go without pay if they're sick, that doesn't require them to provide health insurance, that docks their pay, that allows them to pay a minimum wage to a grocery store worker who now, I've seen the Republicans thanking and tripping over themselves with praise for these grocery store workers that they've been fighting for years to make sure that they're in poverty, that they stay in poverty. That's absurd. We need change on that. Some of my other policies I'm pushing for immigration justice in a way that I haven't seen many state Senate candidates push for. I'm pushing for a ban on local and state funding in the state of Colorado that goes to ICE. Currently, we had an immigration bill in the previous session that got passed, and that got stricken from the bill because they said, "Ooh, that's a step too far. We still want to make sure ICE has the funds to do what they want, right? And we want to make sure taxpayer funds goes to ICE and to deportations and to detentions. They show up to funerals and hospitals and making sure that they arrest our neighbors for no other reason besides they don't like them. They think that they are getting a free ride, living in poverty, still paying taxes in many instances. That's absurd. I'm calling a ban on state and local funds being used for ICE. I'm also calling for a sanctuary state in Colorado and making sure that we can effectively push back against ICE and say, I'm sorry, concentration camps in 2020? No. Nope, that's a line too far. Absolutely not here in the state of Colorado. Not in a state where we allowed internment camps, where we're allowing concentration camps today. We're allowing private concentration camps where taxpayer money is going to funneling those mostly, few men that are operating GEO at this moment, going to lining their pockets while just paying, even the employees there, very poor wages while taking away human rights away from our undocumented neighbors. And that's absurd. Some other policies I'm pushing for criminal justice reform in a way that's not been seen in the state Senate. The ACLU adopted a smart justice report for Colorado that I think everyone should outline. Here, I'm gonna put the link in the chat. Look at this. Like I said, online town halls, they're way more informative than other town halls because you've got links. Okay, there you go. So criminal justice reform, ACLU, Smart Justice Report. They identified that you can lower the state population in Colorado, which let me make a pitch of why we need that to happen at this time, because we are paying 40 grand per inmate. 40 grand per inmate per year. We're not paying that to some teachers right now to lock them up in a cell in many ways that has been identified by the United Nations as torture, especially as we've seen the solidarity confinement that's still being used in the state of Colorado today. The ACLU has identified you can reduce prison populations by 60%. That sounds like a really, really, really big chunk for me. That sounds like a good chunk by just doing something simple, something that's not that controversial, but by decriminalizing all nonviolent offenses. And that might seem big to some of you, right? All nonviolent offenses. Someone knocking on their door and I convinced them, got him onto this plan, who was very skeptical of this plan when I first talked about it to him. That was saying like, oh, what about, Grand Theft Auto? And I'm like, if you didn't hit someone, if you didn't, hurt someone, you didn't actually have a physical violent crime involved with that, if you just stole a car, didn't, crash it into someone else or, get in a high-speed chase, I do not think you need prison time for that for a few different reasons. Let me go through them. One, prison doesn't work. Prison, we have the second highest recidivism rate here in the state of Colorado. And a lot of that is because locking someone up in a cage and putting a permanent stamp on their record saying you're a criminal, you're a felon, you shouldn't be able to get a job, and then putting them on probation where if they make one technical violation, they're back in jail, that's absurd. That's a system designed to make profit, right? That's a system to create a lot of cheap labor, which we've seen here in the state of Colorado. That system is immoral, inexcusable, and we have the power to change it. So I'm going to push for a decriminalization for all nonviolent offenses. We'll still have fines, we'll still have penalties, we'll still have, restorative justice programs that we can make sure that we do have compensation for those. But we also need to make sure we also refocus our priorities. Suncor the other day illegally, once again, put who knows what toxins in the air. Last time it was cyanide, we're still waiting back on the health reports for it, into the atmosphere, had a blare signing warnings, tell people to stay indoors. Luckily, they were already doing that for coronavirus, but then shut down all traffic on streets near it. And that's a $10 billion industry in this case. Last time they did that, illegal, which should be a violent crime, they got a $9 million stamp. And that's I don't have $9 million. I know that maybe it sounds controversial, but I do not have $9 million. But what I do have is knowledge of how much money Suncor makes. They're a $10 billion agency. $9 million is what you and I would pay for a speeding ticket. And they just did it again. And they figured, coronavirus, everyone's stuck in their house, they can't flee. Who cares? We got to make profit. We got to keep turning the gears here. And we got to, put health and safety at risk, even while health and safety is at risk. That's absurd. We not only need to make the fines, meet the crimes and make sure, especially for a $10 billion agency, that they're not walking off with a slap on the wrist, but we need to throw some executives in jail. We need to make sure that we call those actions illegal. If you're upset about Grand Theft Auto, be upset about the cyanide being poured into your atmosphere while people are making profit off of that. While people are making more profit off of it than what you got in the fines and violations for that. You should want them to go in jail as well. So we have to take a step back because, like I said, the prison system not only doesn't work, it's incredibly expensive, but look at who ends up there, right? Look at who ends up in the criminal justice system. You know who. It's not the rich folks. It's not the people running Suncor. It's not the people running these oil and gas industries. It's not the leaders of corporations that are exploiting their workers, putting them in dangerous workplace situations every single day. But those who are in the criminal justice system, and it's not even sometimes those who are guilty, right? We also know that, right? Those in the criminal justice system are largely your, verdict and your sentence and your guilt or not guilt is not largely dependent on the facts of the case. It's largely dependent on your race, your gender identity, your sexual orientation, your access to expensive legal representation, not the facts of the case. And so you want to defend an agency that is locking up tens of thousands of prisoners in the state of Colorado at $40,000 each per year. That's absurd. I'm adopting the ACLU Smart Justice Report. We're going to reduce prison population in the state by 60%. 60%. Okay, let me push for another one. Publicly owned energy. So this is part of the Colorado Green New Deal. And this is really important to me because, especially in the Democratic Party, I hear a lot of different climate strategies, right? Everything from, providing e-bikes. I think that's a big one. Like more e-bikes, that'll stop global warming. We're going to have, a tax credit for, on a $70,000 hybrid. Sure, but maybe there's some bigger things you can focus on. Here's what I'm pushing for. Here's what sets me apart from maybe some other Democrats you've heard running for office. I'm pushing for publicly owned energy in a way that hasn't been seen since FDR. FDR pushed for the Tennessee Valley Authority Act, which put electricity all throughout the entire country. In rural areas, it did not matter if they could make a profit there, it did not matter if it cost more money to bring it to them. They wanted to make sure that every single American had access to electricity. The same thing with communication. We had to make sure that every American had access to a telephone and being able to call emergency services and being able to connect and communicate with one another and be able to, contribute a little bit more and being able to actually, connect to the larger world and making sure we put that line in there. And we still have today states like Nebraska, the liberal state of Nebraska, having 100% of its energy coming from publicly owned companies. One's owned by the state of Nebraska that they run at a not-for-profit that is one of the cheapest rates in the entire United States, is also one of the greenest. They've been having the quickest transition in a lot of ways to wind and solar panels there in Nebraska. And one way they've been able to do that is that they did not have to convince a corporate board. They didn't have to convince a CEO to give up their profits. That's huge. What I do not want to happen is to raise this revenue, push for the Robin Hood taxes, get this newfound hope, have a change here in this economy, and give all that money to corporations to solve the problem. That scares me. That scares me because we also don't have all the solutions. We still know that solar panels still require rare earth minerals that we need to, dive deep into the earth to get. And we want to make sure that in future years we can still pivot, especially if as we make more research and advances into geothermal and into fusion energy, making sure that we can pivot without having to convince a corporate CEO board, because we've seen how difficult that is with oil and gas. And when they have billions and billions and billions of dollars to fight with, especially in elections, they can say no. They can convince everyone else to say no. So what I'm pushing for is publicly owned energy, just like FDR, and actually putting people to work for the state of Colorado, not just in infrastructure, not just putting up those lines like that, but like FDR did. He had it into education, making sure we built the best schools in the world. We can do that in Colorado. We are 46th out of 50th in terms of K through 12 education spending. We are 48th out of 50th, 48th out of 50th behind the liberal states of Oklahoma and Mississippi in higher education spending. We should have the best schools in the world, and that's not without our reach. We just have to change a reallocation of the resources. Once again, not free stuff, but a reallocation of how we raise revenue as a state and what we choose to spend it on. Instead of prisons and incarceration, we spend it on education. Because especially even just tying this back to safety as a society, if we close our minds for a moment, we think about, okay, what's a safe community to me? What does a safe, beautiful area look like to me? What is an area that I don't have to worry about locking my door, or that I'm going to get shot, or that I'm going to get mugged or robbed? What does that look like to me? And if you open your eyes, did that look like an affluent place? Did that place have a good school? Did that place have, adequate housing for every person in there? Did that place have, how about the other side of that? Did that place have a lot of prisons? Did that place have police officers walking around with AK-47s? No, of course not. Safety has never been tied to prisons, has never been tied to police on the street, but has often been tied to access to resources, to education, to affordable housing. And we have to realize that as a state, that we have the power in a democracy to change that allocation of resources, especially here in a crisis. We have a chance to change that conversation, to push this in a way we have never done before. And that's something that I'm fighting for today, tomorrow, and every single day into the future, and why I'm running to become your next state senator. Okay, I've been talking for a moment. Let's go to some of the questions. I definitely want to hear from some folks. If you want, if you're on Zoom right now, which I see a lot of you are, hello, 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 it's good to see you. I saw that number go all the way up to 62 participants. That was amazing. That's awesome. So fantastic. I'm really glad to have you here. And also, hello, hello, hello to all of the Instagram folks. I see the waves. I'm going to wave to some of you right now. Wave, wave. Look at technology. See, I could do this in a real town hall, but electronic means is kind of a little bit more fun. Oh, I have 5 notifications on Facebook. All of it's boring. Never mind. Okay, let's go to the questions here for a moment. So we have a question from Sarah. Hey, Sarah, good to see you. Thanks for attending. She has a question about the climate crisis. Okay, fantastic. She has a question about specifically the taxes on oil and gas and how much I would raise them. That's a great question. So what I'm looking for right now is a 15% oil and gas severance tax on specifically oil and gas corporations here in the state of Colorado. But that's not it, because we also have a tax on carbon, specifically outlining any industries that, like Suncor, that produce pollution, that have a a negative impact on our environment, making sure that they pay those fees to pay for that environmental damage, making sure that they pay for that transition, and making sure that they also are held to the via the fire, especially financially, to make sure that they make that transition as quickly as possible. So I would raise that to 15%. That isn't even the highest in the entire country. It would, I believe, bring in billions of dollars of revenue. They're not going to stop pumping in the state of Colorado, especially with 60,000 oil wells. And making sure that we also have that money to set aside for the transition into a green renewable technology future. That carbon tax will be dependent. It will be on what that pollution is. That's everything from, just even raising a building to actual smoke emission from places like Suncor, to the transportation for your employees. We're going to be looking at a carbon footprint and making sure that we charge, especially corporations. Now, not individuals. This isn't a tax on you or your family. You're not going to be paying those carbon taxes. This isn't yours. This is going to be on corporations, because we need to actually funnel this, as I mentioned, not only into the solution for a Colorado Green New Deal, but to closing the income gap. Because as we've seen with the coronavirus, we have a huge problem with income inequality. We have a lot of people at risk of losing their job, of losing their home, of losing their health insurance, and then that spiraling us into a Great Depression, because workers have always been the engine of this economy, and making sure that they are protected. That carbon tax will not be on them. This will be for corporations. This will be for oil and gas companies, and making sure that we hold that to the fire. I hope you go to my website. You'll see the carbon hood taxes. You'll see, the Robin Hood taxes. Robin Hood, one of my all-time favorite superheroes. Is he a superhero? A cartoon character? A fox? But specifically taxing the rich and giving to the poor. And that's what my campaign aims to do. So thank you for asking that question. We have a question on specifically workers' rights. Read my CU unit. Oh, that's great. Yes, if you haven't yet, I'll put that link into the chat, get some more links in here. This is a really great op-ed. If you haven't read this, I got it in the Boulder Daily Camera, as well as the Colorado Sun. Where is that? I don't have that at the moment. If you go to my website, I'm sorry, I don't have that link at the right of my hands. You'll be able to see that article. Thank you for reading that. I appreciate that. But specifically on workers' rights, let's talk about this for a second, because this is actually a huge part of my plan. Because one thing we need to recognize is, how do we actually push for a political revolution here? How do we actually guarantee that there are the mechanisms in place to actually push for that progressive reform in a way that we haven't seen before? Because otherwise, I'm just here with some John Kelly signs talking to all of you on Zoom. I can understand how that maybe seems uninflated. So we actually need a plan to how we're going to put that in place. And I believe that starts with working people, because as I talked about, 80% of us identified by the Department of Treasury live paycheck to paycheck. That's absurd. That needs to end, but that is also a winning coalition. If we stick together and we vote for our economic interests, sometimes for the very first time, sometimes we've never been able to vote for our economic interests. A lot of times the Democrat and the Republican both look pretty similar in how favorable they are towards corporations, how favorable they are towards, policies that are against workers. So we've seen in the state of Colorado that still has not been fixed. We are an at-will termination state, so you can get fired in the state of Colorado for no reason. They don't have to provide a reason. That's absurd. That's abhorrent. That has caused the crisis that we're in. If we had, actual protections in place, we wouldn't see the Colorado unemployment rate go up by 1,600%. That's not a typo. 1,600%, 1,600% in 1 week. We saw that in the state of Colorado. If we had protections, if they had just cause, we would be able to actually have those protections in place and be able to make sure that workers had those protections. So when I talk about, workplace democracy, what does that look like? That has, one, the ability to not get fired for no reason. That's absurd. I want to change that to just cause, make sure that employers have to at least fill out a form, tell me why they fired you, make sure that those meet, some basic standards. Making sure that employees have the right to organize at work. That's huge. Stop everything right there. We need that as workers. We need to be able to talk about politics. We need to be able to talk about the crisis. We need to be able to talk about our incomes and about how maybe we're struggling financially. If we are part of that 80% that are living paycheck to paycheck, that we, especially millennials who entered the labor market during a recession and are now facing an economic depression at the time where a lot of us are trying to buy a house, start a family, trying to, just get back on our feet and get financially stable. And talking about what we need to get there and hearing some different parts of the conversation. We need to organize at work. We need to actually be able to talk about these larger issues, everything from climate change, everything from income inequality to affordable housing, to our healthcare, to our worker protections. And so when we talk about a political revolution, I think it really does start at work because, as I mentioned, 80% of us are living paycheck to paycheck. That's a huge coalition. It's a massive coalition. That's a coalition that can win an election, a coalition that can reshape politics. If we vote in our economic interest for the first time, where we say, yes, we're going to push for Robin Hood taxes, where we're going to tax the rich and specifically allocate those resources to programs that systematically change our economy, like free in-state college tuition. In the state of Colorado, a huge percentage of our residents, in my district alone, 60%, do not have a college education. That is really affecting our labor market at the moment. And it's something that we can change. It would only cost us $1.1 billion in each year to provide free in-state college tuition to all of our residents. $1.1 billion. We spent 1.2 last year on prisons. So when everyone's like, well, how are we going to pay for it? Well, I've already outlined, as you can see in the link right there, to my policies on my platform on votejohnkelly.com. But why didn't you ask that question for the prisons, right? Why didn't you ask those questions for the tax subsidies that we gave to oil and gas companies, where we allowed them to pay 0.6% in taxes? Why were you fine skipping out on billions and billions of dollars in revenue in that instance? Why didn't you raise that when we talked about a flat tax rate in Colorado, where a CEO like Philip Anschutz, who's made his fortune in oil and gas, pays the same exact tax rate in the state of Colorado as a custodian making minimum wage? Why weren't we raising it then? Because this is the problem we've had with politics. There isn't a political mechanism at the moment to raise these issues and push in a serious way for progressive policies. We've seen gridlock, freeze everything as bipartisanship is the name of the game, in terms of like, oh, okay, how do we find this specific compromise to just get a bill passed? While we didn't actually look at the goal, right? The goal is not to get a bill passed. The bill is to make these problems fixed, where we can actually have solutions, where instead of a Band-Aid, we actually have systematic change. And instead of fighting for that systematic change, I've had mostly the biggest pushback I've had in this campaign has been from Democrats who have said, I agree with you, but we don't want to scare off the other party. Well, if you agree with me, we have the governor's mansion, we have the state senate, we have the state house, and no one is voicing for free in-state college tuition. No one is saying, let's spend $1.1 billion to make sure that we invest in our next generation and making sure that they can provide higher education. We do not have a state senator at the moment pushing for universal childcare, making sure that we help our children from 6 months all the way through college, and making sure that even if they want to pursue a master's or PhD, they have the ability to do so, making sure that education is a human right. Because we live in the wealthiest democracy, the wealthiest country in the world. And Colorado in 2019 was the #1 fastest growing GDP in this country. And we are 48th out of 50th in higher education spending, 46th out of 50th in terms of K through 12 education spending. Why are we okay with that? Why are we okay with, like, oh, we're number one in oil tax breaks? Fantastic. We're number one in worker exploitation. We can get fired for no reason here in the state of Colorado. And we can definitely discriminate against you because you don't have to provide a reason. You don't have to provide a reason to fire you. And so actually pushing against power in the situation, because we need to do that. We need to have a state senator that says, hey, I'm going to hold my friends to the same standard that I'm going to hold my political adversaries to. I'm going to push the same amount of effort every single day for these policies. Maybe I'll compromise, but only as a tool, as a last resort. But actually going in there and talking for these big issues, talking about housing as a human right, following the great state of Utah. Once again, these conservative states are leading the way sometimes in some of these policies. The state of Utah found out that it was much cheaper, much more humane, and much more effective to just provide housing to the homeless instead of criminalizing them, instead of putting spikes, instead of paying for a jail cell for them, instead of paying for a police officer to beat them up, and the pending court cases and the lawsuits that follow, from the medical expenses, from trying to survive on the street and the emergency expenses, but actually providing shelter for them. They were able to do that for about $18,000 per person that was homeless in their state of Utah. They were able to lower their homeless population by 81%. And it sounds ridiculous just saying, oh, yes, providing housing, it's much, much cheaper and much more humane and much more effective. And these are the policies that are not even getting brought up in the state legislature. These are the policies that are saying, like, oh, I'm sorry, this doesn't help corporations. We need a neoliberal agenda. We don't need a working families agenda. We don't need a working progressive agenda. We just need ones that help businesses, right? That's the only narrative that I've been hearing out of the state legislature. So I'm going to be pushing for that in a meaningful way. So that was a mouthful to answer your question. I hope that did answer your question, but let's go to and turn to some other ones. Okay. Sorry, I got to go back to the chat. Went off on a window there. Oh. No matter how hard I try, I'm always like a little awkward on Zoom. It never fails. Like there's at least 6 times where it's just like, oh no. Yeah, specifically, let's talk also about free contraceptives, reproductive health care, and single payer Medicare for all, because we need to talk about this as a state. We need to talk about this as a nation. Colorado tried to do this in 2016 with Amendment 69. I know a lot of you remember that piece of legislation. I was pushing for that heavily. Unfortunately, once again, we had millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars pushed against it, saying, oh, it bankrupted our entire economy, a lot of false narratives saying it's too difficult to implement. How could we absolutely do that? And now we're in a situation where we have to do that immediately. We have to do that overnight, and we have to do that in a way that guarantees people that if they go to a hospital, they're not going to walk out of there with a $150,000 bill that ruins the rest of their life. And I'm not trying to be dramatic there, but ruins the rest of their life. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with living in a society that if you get sick because of a massive epidemic that you can't control, that you had no part in, your government didn't protect you from, you have to pay corporations that are making billions of dollars off of this epidemic? They have a lot of customers now, at the very least, good for them. But paying them, hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes millions of dollars in hospitalization costs, just because your government didn't fight for you, because they didn't put a solution to say, no, I don't think you should have to pay that. I don't think there should be an industry in America that profits off of pain. I don't think that there should be an industry who profits off of pain that specifically grows income inequality, that specifically grows, the wealth gap, that specifically grows the racial wealth gap, the gender wealth gap. We've seen this also impact, disproportionately women, mothers, people of color, undocumented people, and making sure that we have that in a way that has never been seen before. And so we need to do this not only for equality, but providing an avenue for people to get the health care that they need and make sure that they're not being exploited in this industry. And I really hope that we have that push here on a federal level. Here at the state level, there's a lot that we can do. We can push for universal healthcare, and I'll be doing that each and every day, a single payer Medicare for all. We also need to be looking for small ways to help in the meantime. I know I talked about incrementalism, but we need to find these areas that have been causing deep pain. One of those is reproductive healthcare. One of those is reproductive healthcare because that is specifically disproportionately impacts women. People of color, undocumented folks go to Planned Parenthood more often than other folks. LGBTQIA+ community always goes to Planned Parenthood because they know Planned Parenthood is fantastic and they'll treat them with kindness and respect. And they are, a huge resources for those who need HIV tests and treatments, those who need STI tests and treatment, those who need Pap tests, breast cancer screenings. Survivors of sexual assault are often our first resources for Planned Parenthood, as well as reproductive health care for contraceptives to abortion, to the reproductive health care from gender reassignment and making sure that we have hormones in the transition and the counselors that we need there to push for that narrative. So I'm pushing for free reproductive health care in a way that hasn't been seen, making sure we fight for intersectional feminism, right? Being able to talk about how this disproportionately impacts everyone in our community. Well, we are about to get cut off of the Zoom, so I would make this as a last pitch to check me out. Go to my website, go to votejohnkelly.com. You can find out a little bit about my platform. You can also find out about some different ways to get involved and making sure that you can contribute if you'd like. I would love to get a donation from you. I know sometimes that's a little out of the picture, but let me talk to you about how much that can matter to me right now. As I mentioned, I'm going through the Boulder County Assembly, and that's a pretty scary predicament. I wasn't prepared for this. I was hoping to get on for petition, but coronavirus has changed quite a bit of how we function. I want to make sure that we have the resources that it takes to win this race and win this primary. So if you can give $1, $5, $10, $20, that would be really helpful. I'll also put some links in the chat for some donations to food centers around here. We have our center in Longmont. It's a really great food bank. They've been doing tremendous work. They're also in need of volunteers. If you're able and healthy enough to volunteer at this moment, I really implore you that you do. Sisters Camden Community Center, also a great one. I'll put that link in the chat there. Please donate to those agencies as well if you're financially able to do so. I hope everyone had a great town hall experience. I know I did. This was a lot of fun. Got to see a lot of you as attendees on here today. But yeah, I'll be sharing out this recording, and I really hope you were moved in some ways, that you were encouraged to join my campaign and hopefully supporting me as I continue pushing for these conversations to continue throughout this primary. So thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Stay safe. Continue, isolating yourselves, being kind to yourselves, watching Netflix. Don't worry about, doing everything on your to-do list in a moment, but making sure that you are, providing yourself the emotional space, the mental space, the physical space to get through this. And we will get through this together, because there's one thing I know about this community is how resilient we are. I know how this is very intimidating for a lot of different reasons, but we have an opportunity to rise to the occasion, and I know we will do it. So please reach out. Go to my website, votejohnkelly.com. You can also go to the social media on Facebook if you go to Vote John Kelly. If you go to my Instagram at Vote John Kelly, or go to my website at votejohnkelly.com. I would love to hear from you. Thank you. Have a great day.